My name is Amelia Ross, and I will never forget the moment I stood in the middle of my sister's wedding reception, with the entire Ross family and the Whitmores turning to look at me like I didn't belong. Beneath the glittering crystal lights and the sound of hollow laughter, my sister took the microphone, her smile razor sharp. "Who here will bid for a day of service from my sister and her son?" And the whole room laughed. But then a voice rang out, cold and cutting through the air. $500,000, and I'm paying to end this disgusting spectacle. Seconds later, every secret that had been buried for 9 years began to be dragged into the light. Before I share my full story, tell me where you're watching from in the comments, hit the like button, and subscribe if you've ever had to overcome humiliation from your own family. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happened next. At my sister's wedding, they humiliated me and auctioned me off. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. Seattle winters always felt endless, but this December was worse somehow. The kind of damp cold that seeps through your bones and settles in your chest. I was wiping down the counter at Pages and Brews, the bookstore cafe where I worked nights, when I saw it. A cream-colored envelope, expensive paper, my name written in calligraphy across the front. My hands trembled as I picked it up from the mail pile Marcus, the owner, had left for me. Miss Amelia Ross and guest are cordially invited to celebrate the marriage of Sabrina Ross to Christopher Whitmore III. 9 years. 9 years since I'd heard from my family, and this was how they reached out. Not a phone call when Liam died. Not a card when Ethan was born. Nothing but silence and this invitation. I stuffed the envelope in my apron pocket and went back to cleaning espresso machines, but my mind was already spinning. The Whitmores owned half the commercial real estate in the Pacific Northwest. Of course, Sabrina would marry into that world. Of course. "Mom, what's wrong?" Ethan's voice startled me. He'd been doing homework in the corner booth, his 8-year-old face scrunched in concentration over multiplication tables. "Nothing, baby. Just tired." He studied me with those eyes, Liam's eyes, dark and knowing. "You look sad." I forced a smile. "How about we close up early? Hot chocolate at home?" As we walked through the rain to our apartment, Ethan's hand warm in mine, I thought about the last time I'd seen my mother. "That street musician? You're throwing your life away for someone who plays guitar on corners?" Helen's voice had been ice. "Don't come crying to us when you're living in squalor." But Liam had been so much more than that. He'd been the one who saw me, really saw me, when everyone else looked through me. He'd written songs about the way I tucked my hair behind my ear when I was nervous, about how I dog-eared pages in books I loved. He'd made me laugh until my stomach hurt, held me when Dad died, and the lawyer said there was almost nothing left for me. The fire took him 3 years ago. Faulty wiring in our old apartment building. I'd been at work. He'd been writing a new song, the neighbors said. They found his guitar, strings melted, body charred. Now it was just Ethan and me in a studio apartment above a Thai restaurant, the smell of curry and lemongrass our constant companion. Not squalor, exactly, but close enough to prove Helen right. That night, after Ethan was asleep, I sat at our tiny kitchen table and stared at the invitation. The wedding was in 6 weeks, January 20th. They'd given me just enough notice to make it clear I was an afterthought. RSVP by December 30th. I could ignore it, should ignore it. But Ethan had been asking questions lately. Why don't I have grandparents like Jackson does? Why don't we have aunts and uncles? What was I supposed to tell him? That his grandmother thought his father was trash? That his aunt probably didn't even know he existed? My laptop dinged. A new email in my spam folder. No sender name, subject line. What they don't want you to know. I almost deleted it. Then I saw the attachment. The scanned document was grainy but readable. Dad's handwriting, his lawyer's letterhead, a will dated just 2 weeks before his heart attack, completely different from the one Mother had produced. To my daughter Amelia, who dreams of changing the world with her words, I leave the majority of my estate to be held in trust. My coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. The crash woke Ethan. "Mom?" "It's okay, honey. Just drop something, go back to bed. But I couldn't stop staring at the screen. According to this version, I should have inherited $2 million and Dad's investment portfolio. Instead, I'd gotten $50,000. Enough to establish yourself, Helen had said, handing me the check like she was doing me a favor. The document had everything except witness signatures. Without those, it might as well be fiction. My phone buzzed. Another unknown number. Don't let them get away with it again. A friend. I thought back to high school, to the years after Mom remarried, and suddenly Sabrina was the sun everything orbited around. Sabrina with her perfect grades at Exeter Academy while I stayed at public school. Sabrina with her violin recitals and equestrian competitions while I worked at the library to buy my own books. Dad had been different. He'd sneak into my room at night, sit on the edge of my bed. "You're going to do great things, Mimi," he'd say, using the nickname only he called me. Don't let anyone dim your light. But after Richard entered our lives, Richard with his country club membership and investment advice, even Dad seemed to drift towards Sabrina's orbit. Still, he'd promised. The night before he died, he'd squeezed my hand in the hospital. "I've taken care of you, Mimi. The papers are signed." What papers? I'd never found out. Helen handled everything after the funeral. I was 22, devastated, easy to manipulate. "Your father's estate is more complicated than we thought. Debts, bad investments. We're lucky there's anything left at all." And I'd believed her, signed whatever she put in front of me, took my check and my grief and ran straight into Liam's arms. Now, staring at this document, I wondered what else she'd lied about. I picked up the wedding invitation again. 6 weeks to decide if I could face them. 6 weeks to figure out what game someone was playing by sending me this will. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick to work and took the bus to the university district. Lucas Chen still lived in the same apartment, still answered his door looking like he'd just rolled out of bed at 2 in the afternoon. "Amelia? Holy shit. I need your help." He made coffee while I explained everything. Lucas had been my only friend in college, the one who understood what it was like to be the scholarship kid among trust fund babies. Now he worked as a freelance photojournalist specializing in investigative pieces. "This is serious," he said, studying the scanned will on his laptop. "If this is real, we're talking about fraud, maybe worse." "But how do I prove it?" He leaned back, that calculating look I remembered from when we used to dissect our journalism assignments. "You go to the wedding. Lucas, hear me out. They invited you for a reason. Maybe they need you there for appearances. Maybe someone's getting nervous after all these years. Either way, you show up, act normal, and we dig around." "We? You think I'm letting you walk into that snake pit alone? Plus, you need a date, right? I clean up pretty well." For the first time in days, I almost smiled. "You want to crash a Whitmore wedding to play detective? I want to help my friend get what's hers, and maybe get a hell of a story out of it." I thought about Ethan, about the life I could give him with even a fraction of what was stolen, about the journalism career I'd abandoned when I couldn't afford grad school, about all the nights I'd served coffee to tech bros while my sister lived in a Lake Washington mansion. "Okay," I said, "let's do it." I had exactly $300 in savings and a maxed-out credit card. The kind of dress you wore to a Whitmore wedding cost more than my rent. "I can't do this," I told Marcus, sliding the invitation across the bookstore counter. "Look at the venue, the Fairmont? I don't belong there." Marcus, 65, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, studied the invitation. He'd been more than a boss these past 3 years. He'd been the closest thing to a father figure Ethan had. "You know what? Take it," he said, pulling out his wallet. "Call it an advance on your next 6 months." "Marcus, I can't. You can, and you will. Whatever happened between you and your family, that boy deserves to know where he comes from, even if where he comes from is a nest of vipers." That weekend, Lucas and I went shopping at a consignment store in Capitol Hill. I found a simple black dress, elegant in its simplicity. It wasn't designer, but it didn't scream poor relation, either. "You need armor," Lucas said, adjusting his own rented suit. "Not just clothes. Mental armor. These people are going to try to hurt you. He was right. I spent the next weeks preparing Ethan, explaining in gentle terms that we'd be seeing family who hadn't been kind to us. But why? He kept asking. Families are supposed to love each other. How could I explain that sometimes love came with conditions? That to Helen, love meant falling in line, meant choosing the right husband, the right life? Lucas threw himself into research. He had connections from his journalism days, people who could dig into financial records, old society pages, hospital records from when Dad died. Your father was admitted to the hospital 3 times in the month before he died, Lucas told me one evening, papers spread across my kitchen table. All for chest pains, all during meetings with Richard Kenton. Richard, Helen's husband, who'd appeared in our lives like a savior after Dad's first heart attack, offering to help manage the family finances. There's more, Lucas continued. 2 days before your father's final heart attack, he met with a different lawyer, not the family attorney who handled the estate. My hands shook as I set down my coffee mug. Who? Daniel Mercer, high-end financial attorney, still practicing. I looked him up that night. Mercer and Associates, specializing in estate protection and financial crimes. Why would Dad need that kind of lawyer? 3 days before the wedding, another email arrived, this time with a photo. Dad and a younger man I recognized as Daniel Mercer, standing outside a bank. Dad was carrying a briefcase, his face grim. He knew they would try to take everything. He tried to protect you, find Mercer at the wedding. Who was sending these? And how did they know Mercer would be at the wedding? The night before we left for the wedding, I sat on Ethan's bed, watching him pack his new suit. Another gift from Marcus. Mom, are you scared? I smoothed his dark hair, so like his father's. A little. Dad wouldn't be scared, he said quietly. It was the first time he'd mentioned Liam in months. You're right. He wouldn't be. Liam would have walked in with his guitar, made up a song about pretentious weddings on the spot, charmed everyone even as he mocked them. He'd had that gift, making people love him even when he was calling out their bullshit. I didn't have that gift. I'd always been the quiet one, the watcher, the one who noticed things but kept them to myself. Maybe that's why it had been so easy for them to erase me. But I wasn't 22 anymore. I wasn't grieving and lost and alone. I had Ethan, I had Lucas, I had questions that demanded answers. We're going to be fine, I told my son, and for the first time, I almost believed it. The morning of the wedding dawned gray and drizzling, Seattle putting on its finest display. Lucas arrived early, camera bag slung over his shoulder. Remember, he said as we loaded into his car, we're just guests. Happy family reunion. Don't let them see you bleed. As we drove toward the Fairmont, Ethan chattering excitedly about staying in a hotel, I fingered the email printouts in my purse. Evidence, questions, ammunition. They'd sent the invitation, now they'd have to deal with accepting it. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel looked like a palace floating on a cloud of money. Chandeliers dripped crystal tears over guests in gowns that cost more than my car. I kept my hand on Ethan's shoulder, as much to steady myself as to guide him. Amelia? I turned to find Cousin Charlotte, Helen's niece, eyes wide with perfectly manufactured surprise. Oh my God, I didn't think you'd actually come. The emphasis on actually wasn't lost on me. I forced a smile. Wouldn't miss Sabrina's big day. Charlotte's gaze slid to Ethan, then to Lucas, calculating. And this must be my son, Ethan, and my friend Lucas. Son? She couldn't have looked more shocked if I'd introduced a pet dragon. Helen didn't mention. Of course she hadn't. We were seated at table 23. So far from the main action, we might as well have been in a different zip code, right next to the service door, where waiters brushed past with increasingly pitying looks. This is so cool, Ethan whispered, eyes wide at the ice sculptures and towers of flowers. My heart broke a little. This should have been his normal. Family weddings, celebrations, belonging. I spotted Helen at the head table, resplendent in silver, holding court. She hadn't aged so much as calcified into a more expensive version of herself. Sabrina floated beside her in a dress that probably cost more than Ethan's college fund, her new husband tall and bland as wheat toast. There, Lucas murmured, nodding toward a table near the front. Daniel Mercer, gray suit, talking to the woman in blue. My mysterious correspondent had been right. But how could I approach him here? The speeches began. Christopher Whitmore Sr. welcomed Sabrina to the family with the warmth of a business merger. Helen spoke about destiny and proper matches. Then Sabrina took the microphone, her smile sharp as winter sun. Before we continue the festivities, I want to acknowledge someone special. My sister Amelia is here tonight. Heads turned, my stomach dropped. It's been so long since we've been together as a family. Amelia, would you and your companion please join me up here? The room held its breath. Ethan looked at me, confused. Lucas tensed. I could have refused, should have refused. But 300 pairs of eyes were watching, and my son didn't understand why Mommy wouldn't go to Aunt Sabrina. We walked through an ocean of whispers. I heard fragments. The one who married that street person. Helen's disappointment. Living in poverty now. Sabrina's smile never wavered as we climbed the steps to the stage. Everyone, my sister Amelia and her son. Ethan, is it? She knew his name. Of course she did. As you all know, family is everything to the Rosses, even when some of us make unconventional choices. Laughter rippled through the crowd. That's why tonight, we want to do something special. A little family tradition. A charity auction. My blood turned to ice. Who here would bid for a day of service from my sister and nephew? Think of it as supporting the less fortunate while getting your errands run, your cars washed, your $500,000. The voice cut through the room like a blade. Everyone turned. A man stood at table 8, tall and severe in a charcoal suit. Daniel Mercer. I bid $500,000, he repeated, his voice carrying despite its quiet tone. Though I should clarify, I'm not buying people. I'm paying to end this disgusting display. Sabrina's smile cracked. Helen half rose from her chair. Mercer walked toward the stage with deliberate steps. While we're discussing family traditions, perhaps we should discuss other Ross family traditions, like fraud, like forging wills, like stealing millions from their own daughter. The room erupted. Cameras flashed. Lucas wasn't the only journalist here. Christopher Whitmore Sr.'s face went purple. Helen gripped the table. You have no proof, she hissed, but her voice carried in the sudden silence. Don't I? Mercer reached the stage, helped me down with old-fashioned courtesy. To the room, he announced, Edwin Ross left the bulk of his estate to Amelia. I have the documents, the real ones. I also have evidence of what happened to him in the weeks before his death. Would anyone like to see? Security moved in. Guests scrambled, but Mercer just smiled, cold as February rain. You sent that invitation, he said quietly to Helen. You opened this door. Now face what walks through it. The Whitmore security team efficiently hustled us out of the ballroom. Mercer, Lucas, Ethan, and me into a small conference room. My son clung to my hand, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Mom, why is everyone angry? Before I could answer, Daniel Mercer knelt to Ethan's level. Because sometimes, young man, people don't like it when the truth crashes their party. You did nothing wrong. Helen burst through the door, Richard close behind, her perfect composure finally cracking. How dare you? Sit down, Helen. Mercer's voice could have frozen hell. Unless you'd prefer I share what I know with the Times instead of privately. She sat. Richard's face had gone gray, his usual swagger evaporated. Mercer opened his briefcase with surgical precision. Edwin Ross came to me in September 2016, 3 months before his death. He'd discovered several irregularities in his finances. Money being moved without his authorization. Investment accounts opened in his name that he knew nothing about. He slid a folder across the table. He suspected Richard was stealing from him, with Helen's knowledge. That's slander, Richard started. It's documented. Mercer pulled out bank statements, signatures, dates circled in red. But Edwin's real concern was protecting Amelia's inheritance. He knew what you were capable of, Helen. how you'd already positioned Sabrina to take everything. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in her eyes. So he created a new will. Properly witnessed, notarized, filed with my firm. Another document appeared. 70% of his estate to Amelia, including a trust fund he'd been building since her birth, hidden from the family accounts Richard managed. If this will existed, Helen said carefully, why didn't you come forward when Edwin died? Mercer's expression darkened. Because the day after Edwin signed it, he had his first major heart attack. During a meeting with Richard about irregularities in the books, and when I tried to visit him in the hospital, I was told the family had restricted visitors. By the time he died, you'd already produced your version of the will. The witnesses to the real will, both elderly friends of Edwin's, died within 6 months. 1 car accident, 1 stroke. The room went silent except for Ethan's breathing against my shoulder. Convenient? Lucas murmured, camera hanging loose at his side. I couldn't prove murder, Mercer continued, but I could wait. Edwin made me promise to wait until Amelia was strong enough to fight you, until she had something to fight for. He glanced at Ethan. I think he'd say that time has come. You have no proof, Helen repeated, but her voice shook. I have Edwin's private investigators' reports, his recorded conversations with Richard about the missing money, his medical records showing elevated levels of digitalis, a heart medication that, in the wrong doses, can trigger fatal arrhythmias. Richard stood abruptly. We're leaving. No, I said, finding my voice for the first time. You're not. Everyone turned to stare at me, the quiet daughter finally speaking. 9 years, I said. 9 years of silence, of scraping by, of telling my son we don't have family because I couldn't bear to explain that his grandmother thought his father was garbage, that his aunt would rather pretend he doesn't exist. I looked at Helen. Liam died thinking he'd failed us. He took every extra shift, played his guitar until his fingers bled, trying to make enough money because he knew you'd never help. He was in that apartment because it was all we could afford. He died because you... My voice broke. Ethan pressed closer. The trust fund, Mercer said gently, is worth approximately $8 million now. The other investments Edwin hid from Richard are worth another 4. It's all yours, Amelia. It always was. Helen's composure finally shattered completely. You can't prove any of this in court. The witnesses are dead. It's hearsay. Helena Ross. A new voice from the doorway. We all turned to see an elderly woman in an elegant navy dress leaning on a cane. Margaret? Helen's face went white. Margaret Sinclair. Helen's best friend from college, maid of honor at her first wedding. I hadn't seen her since Dad's funeral. I've held my tongue for 9 years, Margaret said, walking slowly into the room. Watched you destroy your daughter, steal from your dead husband, live your glittering life. But seeing what you tried to do tonight? She shook her head. Edwin was my friend too. I won't be silent anymore. Margaret Sinclair's testimony unfolded like a thriller novel in Mercer's downtown office the next morning. Lucas recorded everything while Ethan played games on my phone in the corner, protected from the worst details. Helen came to me 2 weeks after Edwin's funeral, Margaret said, her voice steady despite her age. She was panicked. Said Edwin had hidden money, that there was another will. She needed help finding it before that little bitch, her words, could claim it. Each word was a knife, but I kept my face neutral. I'd learned that from Helen, at least. I helped her search Edwin's office. We found the trust documents, the real will. She burned them in the fireplace while I watched. Margaret's hands trembled on her cane. I've regretted my silence every day since. Why now? Mercer asked gently. Because I'm dying. Margaret said it simply, like discussing the weather. Pancreatic cancer, 3 months, maybe 6. I won't meet my maker with this on my conscience. She turned to me. Your father loved you fiercely, Amelia. Those last months, all he talked about was ensuring you could pursue your dreams. He knew Helen favored Sabrina, knew Richard was poisoning her against you. The trust was his way of protecting you. But the witnesses to the will, Harold Chen and William Dray, both in their 80s, both with health conditions. Their deaths might have been natural. Margaret paused. Or Richard might have helped nature along. He had connections at their nursing home. The implications hung heavy in the air. Murder. We were talking about murder. There's more, Lucas said, pulling out his laptop. I've been digging into Richard's business dealings. He's been using Helen's money that should have been Amelia's, to prop up failing investments. He's desperate. The Whitmore marriage was supposed to be his lifeline. Which brings us to now, Mercer said. Helen, Richard, and Sabrina have been living on stolen money for nearly a decade. That ends today. But as we prepared the legal documents, my phone rang. Sabrina. Don't do this, she said without preamble. Please, Amelia, I'm pregnant. The words stopped me cold. What? 2 months. It's why we moved the wedding up. Her voice cracked. But Christopher doesn't know. It's not his. I closed my eyes. Of course there was more. Whose is it? David Whitmore, Christopher's father. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. Her father-in-law? Jesus. He's been helping Richard with the investments in exchange for... She couldn't finish. Sabrina, I know what it is, she sobbed. But if this comes out, if Christopher learns the truth, the prenup, I'll have nothing. The baby will have nothing. I thought of Ethan in the corner, innocent and trusting, of another child who would grow up in this toxic web. Come to the office, I heard myself say. Bring everything you have on Richard and David's dealings. An hour later, my sister sat across from me for the first time in 9 years. Without her armor of makeup and designer clothes, she looked fragile, young, lost. I didn't know, she whispered. About Dad. About the will. I swear, Amelia, I was 17. Helen told me you were getting your share, that Dad wanted me to have the rest because you were older, established. You never questioned why I disappeared? She said you were too proud to accept help, that Liam had turned you against us. Tears streaked her perfect foundation. I was so stupid, but by the time I realized, I was trapped too. Richard controls everything. David owns Richard. And now... She touched her stomach. I saw it then. The cage she'd built for herself, golden bars and all. Helen had raised her to be ornamental, dependent. She'd never learned to stand on her own feet. Help us nail Richard and David, I said finally. Testify about what you know. In exchange, I'll make sure you and the baby are provided for. You'd do that? After everything? I thought of Liam, how he'd always seen the good in people, how he'd forgiven my family's cruelty even as it cut him. I'm not doing it for you, I said honestly. I'm doing it for a child who didn't ask to be born into this mess. Sabrina broke down completely then, shoulders shaking with the kind of sobs that come from years of suppressed truth. In the corner, Ethan looked up from his game. Mom, is the sad lady okay? She will be, I said, hoping it wasn't a lie. The next 48 hours blurred together like rain on windows. Depositions, document reviews, strategy sessions that stretched past midnight. Sabrina had brought a treasure trove of evidence. Emails between Richard and David Whitmore discussing the Ross situation, recordings of Richard threatening her if she didn't comply with David's demands, financial records showing money laundering through shell companies. It's enough to bury them, Mercer said, spreading papers across his conference table. Criminal charges for Richard and David. Helen could claim ignorance, maybe avoid jail, but she'll be ruined. The Seattle elite will feast on this scandal. But as I stared at the evidence, all I could think about was Ethan asking if the sad lady was okay, about the baby growing inside my sister, about cycles that spin through generations like tornadoes, leaving wreckage in their wake. There's another option, I said slowly. Lucas looked up from his camera. Amelia, they stole millions from you. Your father might have been murdered. You can't seriously be thinking. I'm thinking about endings, I interrupted. About what Dad would actually want. That night, I called Helen. She answered on the first ring. Come to Mercer's office tomorrow. Alone. No Richard. Why would I? Because your grandson deserves better than visiting you in prison. The silence stretched so long, I thought she'd hung up. Then, quietly, grandson? His name is Ethan. He's 8. He likes dinosaurs and soccer and reads 3 grades above his level. I swallowed hard. He's never had a grandmother. Another silence. Then, 10 o'clock. She arrived precisely on time, looking every inch the society matron despite the circumstances. But her hands shook as she sat down. I laid out 2 folders. Option 1, we proceed with criminal charges. Richard and David go to prison. You probably avoid jail but lose everything. The scandal destroys the Ross name. Sabrina's baby grows up knowing their family legacy is fraud and murder. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Option 2, you sign everything over to me. Every penny of Dad's estate, the properties, all of it. You and Sabrina leave Seattle permanently. Richard faces charges alone. I won't protect him. In exchange, I ensure Sabrina and her baby are financially secure and— I took a breath. And Ethan grows up knowing he has a grandmother who made terrible mistakes but tried to make amends. Helen's composure finally cracked. You'd want me in his life? After everything? I want him to have what I never did, a complete family. But only if you can be the grandmother he deserves. No poison, no favoritism, no conditions on love. She looked at the photographs Lucas had taken at the wedding. Ethan in his little suit, eyes bright with wonder. He looks like Edwin, she whispered. He has Liam's eyes. For the first time in my memory, Helen flinched at my husband's name. I was wrong, about him, about everything. Yes, you were. She signed the papers with trembling hands. As she prepared to leave, she turned back. The digitalis. I didn't know, I swear to you, Amelia, I didn't know Richard was— I believe you. And surprisingly, I did. Helen was many things, but she'd loved my father in her way. 3 weeks later, Richard Kenton was arrested on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and suspicion of murder. David Whitmore's empire crumbled when investigators found decades of financial crimes. The Seattle elite had their scandal, but the Ross name stayed clean. I used part of the inheritance to establish the Edwin Ross Foundation, providing scholarships for young writers and journalists. The first recipient was a girl from White Center who reminded me of myself at 18, hungry to tell stories that mattered. Lucas won a Pulitzer for his exposé on financial crimes among Seattle's elite families. He carefully omitted any mention of the Ross family. Sabrina moved to Portland, where she's raising her daughter, Hope, as a single mother. We talk twice a week. She's learning to stand on her own feet, and I'm learning to forgive. And Helen? She lives in a modest apartment in Wallingford now. Every Sunday, she takes Ethan to the museum or the market or just for walks in the rain. She's learning to be a grandmother, and he's teaching her to love without conditions. 1 year later, the Edwin Ross Foundation's first anniversary gala sparkled with understated elegance. No ice sculptures or champagne towers, just good people gathering to celebrate young voices finding their power. Mom, there's a lot of people here, Ethan said, adjusting his tie. He'd grown 3 inches this year, was starting to lose the little boy roundness in his face. They're here for a good cause, baby. Daniel Mercer raised his glass for a toast. To Edwin Ross, who believed in protecting what matters. To his daughter, who proved that justice doesn't always require revenge. And to the 15 young writers whose futures begin tonight. As applause filled the room, I spotted Helen in the corner, deep in conversation with one of our scholarship recipients. She caught my eye and smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. You did good, Mimi, Lucas said, appearing at my elbow. Your dad would be proud. You think he knew? I asked. How it would all turn out? I think he knew you. That you'd be strong enough to fight, but wise enough to know when to stop fighting. Later, as the evening wound down, Ethan found me on the terrace overlooking Elliott Bay. The rain had stopped, and the city lights reflected on the water like scattered stars. Mom, why did you let Grandma Helen stay? I'd been waiting for this question. Because hate is heavy, baby, and I got tired of carrying it. He considered this with that serious expression that was pure Liam. Dad would understand. You think so? Yeah, he always said the best songs end with hope. Margaret Sinclair had passed away 6 months earlier, but not before recording her full testimony. She'd left me a letter. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, dear girl. It's choosing to build something better from the rubble. As we headed inside, Ethan slipped his hand into mine. So what happens now? I thought about the question. The foundation was thriving. My own writing, dormant for so long, was finally flowing again. Sabrina was finding her strength. Helen was discovering the grandmother she could have always been. The circles of hurt were breaking, slowly but surely. Now, I squeezed his hand. Now we write the next chapter. Behind us, Seattle hummed with its eternal rain song. Ahead, the future waited, uncertain but no longer fearsome. Sometimes the greatest revenge is choosing not to seek revenge at all. Sometimes the last invitation is really the first.